Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show never afraid to say gay. I'm Christy Powell, and I'm joined tonight by writer, scholar, and ex-evangelical Chrissy Stroop. Welcome back, Chrissy.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Christy. It's great to join you again.
Yeah, for sure. And now that the dust has settled, we're going to take some time tonight to do, I guess, a bit of a damage report on the state of the world and to rally for the next volley. So give us a call with your stories and your questions. We're here at 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex because the show is coming right now. All right. Well, I know that we start every week with what's turning us on this week, but I gotta go ahead and just tell everybody, Chrissy and I talked before the show, and there was serious conversation about like, what can we honestly say is helping to get us in the mood this week when we're already kind of in a mood. You know, this is not a great time to be like invested in queer rights and in, I guess, just general human welfare as a concept. But that being said, Chrissy, we're super excited to have you back. What has got you turned on or maybe distracted from the state of the world right now?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it has been a rough week, a rough period, really. So, of course, we've got to find our outlets, our self-care. I've been doing a little escapism into video games. You know, while we're waiting for a new Pokemon core game and that franchise to come along, there's Pokemon Legends Arceus. It's pretty fun. I've been snuggling the dog. I mean, honestly, it's just I don't have much energy for much else.
Yeah, wherever you can find your comfort, for sure. I mean, I definitely want to mention that today is the Trans Day of Visibility, which is a good thing. I guess I should start there, but maybe we'll break that down a little bit more and some of the concerns attached to that. But in terms of things that are turning me on and getting me excited, you know, Human Resources on Netflix is a pretty decent enough show. The folks behind Big Mouth have put out a sort of follow-up spin-off. And like Big Mouth, I think it may take a little while for it to get up on its feet and to really find its voice. But it's a pretty interesting exploration of human sexuality and emotions. And just as a therapist, I'm already having people come to me and talk about this show and say, have you seen this? Because it explains my situation. So I'm hoping that some people might find a little bit of escapism in a bunch of dumb dick jokes and cartoons, because I think that's about the most we got for everybody right now.
I'm a big fan of cartoons, and I mean, some of the cartoons that have been popular in recent years have really done great things for queer representation. I mean, I'm thinking, of course, of Steven Universe, but also the reboot of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Like, those are some pretty awesome cartoons.
Yeah, and I'll put that.
21 years old, and I still watch cartoons.
Yeah, no, I'll put this right next to those. Big Mouth, I think, can definitely turn a lot of people off with, the dick jokes and fart noises and the type of stuff you often see in adult cartoons. But it's actually a really accurate and pretty sex positive way of exploring human sexuality, and Human Resources seems to be continuing that trend. So I think it's definitely worth recommending. But as we've been saying, it's really no secret that right now there are dozens of recently passed or pending bills working their way through various state legislatures, removing a lot of protections or limiting the rights for queer Americans. And, ultimately, Chrissy, I know that this is kind of an unfair question, but I was kind of hoping you'd be able to tell us, like, what the fuck? Like, what the going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so broad, view from sort of 30,000 feet sociological analysis is what's going on is major right-wing backlash by primarily white conservative Christians who are afraid that they're losing their America, right? And at root of this is a lot of things. I mean, it's not just about trans people or queer people. It's also about patriarchy, and so these anti-abortion laws that are being passed and considered, we have a real test of Roe v. Wade coming up at the Supreme Court, and it's this year's session. They're all connected too, as well as white supremacy. So you have this white conservative Christian demographic in the United States whose history is just steeped in white supremacy and the strict enforcement of patriarchy. They know at this point that there are fewer of them than there are of the rest of us who want to have a normal, sort of nice pluralist country where we don't have hierarchies based on those things.
That whole melting pot thing that we were promised when we were in third grade. Yeah.
It threatens them. So, as an authoritarian demographic, largely a demographic that exhibits an authoritarian ethos, they externalize their problems. They scapegoat other groups of people. They look for vulnerable targets. They would like to push back everyone's rights to, the 1950s when the straight white Christian male was just so clearly on top of American society. And right now, the easiest demographic to target would be transgender people. We're not as widely understood in the general population as certain other marginalized groups. A lot of people don't think that they know a transgender person. But, it's not going to stop there. And I mean, and the assault on abortion is happening, of course, simultaneously, and also just on anything non-heteronormative. And a lot of it is targeting youth, right? Because they're trying to clamp down and get the kids back under control, right? They know that kids are leaving religion in droves, that kids are more likely to identify as queer, simply because they feel, I guess, safer and more validated in simply being themselves. They don't think that really there's a huge difference in how many people are queer, in Gen Z versus older generations. It's just that.
Yeah, your parents might not think that, but in terms of like sociologists and the experts, genetically, we're pretty well the same species we always were. So how much of this comes down to like control of information? Because kids have TikTok now. Kids have access to the internet. There are more than 4 channels. And so you can't just yell at like your local Fox affiliate to stop playing The Simpsons if you want to keep people from knowing about like counterculture.
Right. They definitely want to control information where and how they can. And I think by and large, that's going to be a failed project. But what are they doing right now? And they're screaming at school boards to ban mouse and get rid of this CRT that they don't understand what it is and no one is teaching in schools per se. Anyway,
push back on that. I think Ted Cruz knows what CRT is. I mean, he has achieved enough to have at least gotten a sufficient education to know that he's full of shit, but chooses to be full of shit, right? Like, because he knows the people he's talking to don't know what he's talking about.
Ted Cruz may well have a fairly decent understanding of what it is as a kind of theory of legal structures, right? And how the law works and how race works throughout American society. Yeah, he might get that. But basically, they're mad that the schools want to teach kids about the real history of race in the United States. And they're trying to clamp down on sex education. I mean, let's be honest. The vast majority of sex education in the United States is abstinence only anyway, even if it's rebranded.
Sure.
So, but they want to make it impossible for teachers to affirm and oppose bullying of queer kids in school at all. That's what's happening in Florida.
Yeah. I don't have good academic work on this, and so I'm happy to be corrected by anybody who could point me towards a meaningful study. But what I have been seeing or understanding on the ground from the sex educators that I know and work with, we're at a moment right now where it's not even the case that people are getting like a comprehensive, not even just non-comprehensive, but I guess what I'm trying to say, it's not the case that people are getting sex education that is centered around abstinence only. It's that the abstinence question has like stymied the entire circumstance such that there just isn't sex education anymore. Because there was so much debate about like how to handle some of these issues, we kind of collectively decided to just not do it as a society. And so kids are learning from TikTok and from pornography and from these other sources that are, in some cases, better than their parents, but still far from ideal, right?
Sure. Yeah. What can I say?
Sure. Well,
I don't watch. I have to admit, I'm going to show my age a little bit here, but I don't regularly consume a lot of TikTok videos, so I don't know what the kids are saying about sex on TikTok.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to pretend that I understand anything that the kids are saying these days, let alone the TikToks. But people are no doubt familiar, sort of vaguely, with what we're calling the Don't Say Gay bill that just passed in Florida, SB 8 tackling abortion here in Texas, not to mention the opinion put out by Ken Paxton and some of these like big banner headlines. But what do you feel is important for us to understand about some of the particulars here? What stands out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose a number of things stand out. I mean, if you want to talk about Texas, it's interesting that in recent years, most bills targeting the trans community have not passed. If you think back to like the bathroom bill debates in 2015, and then last year there were 76, I believe, proposed bills targeting the trans population, mostly trans youth. Only one passed, the sports ban, and that's partly because in the Texas State Senate, you've got this faction of Republicans who understand that passing these radical, extreme, social conservative right-wing bills is bad for business, right? So they sometimes put a stop to the more extreme expressions of social conservatism coming out of the Texas State Legislature. But now, I guess what you want to talk about Texas and the assault on trans kids and their families, what really stands out is that Ken Paxton, and the governor just on their own engaged in this massive, I guess let's just call it executive overreach, right? And they implemented this policy of ordering CPS to open sham child abuse investigations against the loving parents of transgender kids without the legislature's approval. And, I've talked to some of these parents from my recent reporting. I've talked to legal experts, and this is clearly unconstitutional on its face, just according to the Texas State Constitution. That's not a controversial opinion among actual experts on Texas law. There's a lot of arguments that it's unconstitutional also for equal protection reasons in terms of the United States Constitution. But with Texas law, the executive isn't supposed to be able to do this without legislative backing. And they decided to do it anyway. And I think they partly did it because of the primaries and elections that they were involved in, right. but also because of their ideology. And Ken Paxton is well known for being an extreme right-wing Christian. I mean, that's kind of what he does, that and felony fraud stuff that he never actually.
Those are his two big things. Yeah. Well, if so many of these bills are not actually getting passed, there is a lot of, as you said, executive overreach. I mean, frankly, a lot of these things, particularly what we're seeing coming out of Texas, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the AG's office, it feels like theater. And so it doesn't really seem to be about making like meaningful change to legislation so much as it is about grabbing headlines and motivating a base. Am I reading that right at all?
I think that's one aspect of it. But I mean, there are families that have actually been targeted by CPS already, and I don't think it feels like theater to them.
I hear that.
They're actually, threatening to throw them in jail or take their children away. So this is very real. It may, and I don't think it's purely cynical on the part of Ken Paxton. I think he really believes this, but there's certainly a political theater element of it at the elite level, but it has really extremely damaging impacts on people's lives. As far as I understand it, the investigations are supposed to be paused again. The law is enjoined again until the Texas State Supreme Court is going to hear something about it. So that's the current state of affairs. But the investigation stopped because of an injunction, started again. I think now they're stopped again. But there are families. I've spoken with one of them who have been contacted by CPS and told that they were having an investigation opened against them because they have a trans son. This and you could compare it with SB 8, right? Because this is operating on the creation of a culture of denunciation.
Yeah,
so
to be clear here, you've been talking about the Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas's letter informing people about his interpretation, his kind of bullshit interpretation of existing law, and then Greg Abbott pushing for local agencies to investigate based on that interpretation. And then SB 8 is the abortion rights law that we've been talking about for the last several months that is currently under an injunction and is likely working its way up to the Supreme Court. Do I have all that right?
That's right.
Okay.
And here's what I mean by a culture of denunciation. So, Governor Abbott in his letter actually implementing this policy after Ken Paxton issued the opinion back in, I think, early to mid-February, whenever this whole thing got started, it escalated very quickly. So he ordered mandatory reporters to report on anyone that they suspect of allowing their children to experience, age-appropriate, gender-affirming medical care.
Which,
and,
just to clear up for the audience, I am one of those people. Like, I am a mandated reporter in the state of Texas. So is every teacher, every nurse, administrators of a number of different sorts. Anybody related to the medical field is likely a mandated reporter. I don't mean to keep interrupting you. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear just how widespread this all is. But please,
right?
No,
that's very important. A lot of people may not be that familiar with the category of mandated reporter, and it varies some from state to state. But yeah, in many cases, broadly speaking, people who work with children are supposed to report any suspicions they have of any sort of child abuse, even if you think it'll probably come out unfounded or it's probably nothing. You're supposed to report it. And so now what's literally happening in Texas, well, at the moment it's paused, but it has been happening, is that you have to choose, right, between breaking the law as it's being interpreted by this administration or doing something that is in fact itself abusive, and that is targeting these families who haven't done anything wrong, who have been following medical best practices, and been loving and supporting their kids. And so, again, as I said, it's a culture of denunciation, right? There's this encouragement of people to spy on their neighbors, tell on their neighbors, interfere in people's private lives. And it's the same with SB 8 because of its very strange private enforcement mechanism in which if you are aware of anyone who is even just a party to someone having an abortion, after 6 weeks, then you are supposed to, you're able to sue them and get $10,000 from the state, right? So this is encouraging denunciations of targeted groups. I mean, this is really serious authoritarian sort of Soviet style stuff, if you will, right? Get people to surveil one another and denounce one another to the state. That's very not how people would have used to think about Texas, I think. Right? Is that there's going to be the government is supposed to have this much interference in ordinary people's lives and is looking to people to spy on their neighbors and rat to the government.
Yeah. No, this is theoretically a very libertarian state, a very personal rights and small government state. That's certainly not how we operate, but that's how we like to think of ourselves, which is one of the very aggravating things about this entire experience, because it doesn't take a whole lot of sifting to recognize just how much bullshit there is in this process, how much of this is about distracting people and about throwing people off the scent and going through procedures that just don't make any good goddamn sense. There's pretty bald-faced bigotry at work here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was talking to a law professor, Charles Rhodes, goes by Rocky, who's based in Houston. And he was, gosh, I kind of lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry. What was the last comment you made again?
Yeah, just how much of this is total theater and bullshit. And I think you were referring to a part in the piece that you put out a couple of days ago where a legal expert was telling you just how obviously this was not going to pass or was obviously unconstitutional.
Yeah. He had a lot of very interesting things to say. Very, very interesting legal analysis. And he also had a few choice words for Ken Paxton, a man he called an opportunist.
Sure. Yeah.
Interesting. They're both alumni of Baylor University, but very, very different sorts of people.
Fair to say. Well, one thing that has me curious and maybe a little bit paranoid even is watching how there are these big headline bills that we've been talking about and people are making jokes about at the Oscars and we're having this culture war over. And then there seem to be little copycats popping up all over the country faster than we can even really address them. What should we make of that?
What exactly do you mean by copycats? You mean the kind of state laws that are spreading through different?
For instance, when we're talking about SB 8, the Texas abortion law, as I understand it, the enforcement mechanism is sort of laughably unconstitutional. And I guess we'll have proper legal scholars examine that idea. But assuming it does not actually pass muster once it arrives at the Supreme Court, it would seem kind of silly to have gone through all of that effort for anything other than to just upset people. It doesn't really seem like it is a law that is meant to be law. And yet there are similar, if not identical, bills that have popped up all over the country. And that's similarly true for a lot of the things that we're talking about tonight. And I guess I don't know that this is some like massive coordinated conspiracy or shadowy cabal of evil people at work, but I can't help but imagine some level of mustache twirling. Does that feel valid?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so I haven't looked into the exact details of who might have written the language for some of these bills, but we do know that right-wing organizations like ALEC and Alliance Defending Freedom, Liberty Counsel, and others, they do draft bills, which are then taken as the basis for bills that are introduced in state legislatures. Also, this group of people associated with the Congressional Prayer Caucus, with the different affiliates at the state level, called Project Blitz, they're trying to pass various kinds of Christian nationalist laws, and they provide templates basically. And so there's state legislatures. There's a lot of direct copying and pasting and just seeing what other states are doing and what right-wing think tanks and conservative action organizations are suggesting and building bills from there. So yeah, a lot of them look a lot like each other. And I think some conservatives really do think that they can get away with this private enforcement mechanism thing because no one will have standing to sue because there's no agent of the state involved. But with respect to SB 8, it does look now like some local funds and organizations that are working to help Texans who need abortion care to get out of state, get the funding that they need to do that, are going to be able to force the issue to move up the court system in the federal courts, and they should be able to avoid the 5th district being so conservative. They can go to the federal courts in DC And they're going to be suing groups like the Thomas More Society that have threatened to sue them under the provisions in SB 8. So this is one path that seems to be opening up now for SB 8 to work towards the Supreme Court. But, I'm not at all sure that's a good thing, because I'm not at all sure what the Supreme Court is going to. I mean, I'm not sure they're going to do the right thing in these cases.
Yeah.
Not at all sure. SB 8 is wacky, but also it might not be even needed anymore if Jackson, Mississippi versus Whole Women's Health is decided in a way that they just outright overturn Roe v. Wade. I'm pretty sure 5 at least of the majority 6 conservative justices would be ready to go all the way and just overturn Roe, which opens up a whole other can of worms, because then you've got the whole right to privacy issue starting to go out the window. And so you can relitigate birth control. You can relitigate interracial marriage. I mean, you can relitigate sodomy laws, all kinds of things that depend on the right to privacy established in Roe and Casey, right? But yeah, I think Chief Justice Roberts, because he cares about trying to maintain a veneer of legitimacy for the court, isn't going to be so eager to overturn a major precedent. And he might try to bring someone like Gorsuch along. Gorsuch is the only one I think he could possibly win over, but I'm not sure that he will. So Roe may die this June. I mean, it's already a dead letter in much of America.
Sure. Yeah. In terms of what's actually facts on the ground, I know that we're talking very broadly and in very big ways about a number of things that are really impossible to make predictions about. But with the confirmation of Justice Jackson still somewhat in limbo, what do you imagine happening as some of these things start to hit the courts? Do you really feel like it is likely that SB 8 will not be overturned or will be upheld? Do you feel like some of these other bigger issue items will squeak by? Or again, as I've been kind of suggesting, is this all just a bunch of drama before the midterms?
I mean, I do think it's really very dangerous stuff. It's more than just drama. It is something that the base wants, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to result in real violence to real people. You can't just create these monsters and keep them under Control. I'm not a legal expert, so I need to, put that caveat there. I've talked to a lot of legal experts about this stuff, though, for the kind of reporting and analysis that I do. I think I need to be cautious about making predictions about SB 8. I could certainly see the enforcement mechanism being, say, overturned, but not the 6-week abortion ban itself. Mm-hmm. But I honestly think it is very likely, because again, 5 out of the 6 conservative justices are really extreme zealots. I mean, I see the Supreme Court as pretty much an illegitimate institution at this point. It's been stacked, it's been politicized by the far right. And so I think they're likely to just overturn Roe altogether. I really think that's a very real possibility that people need to be prepared for. The conventional wisdom always used to be that, Republicans will never let Roe be overturned because it's so good for, ginning up support for their elections. Sure. But once you start these social processes in motion, I mean, again, you can't keep that monster under control.
You can only edge something for so long before it explodes.
So there you go.
Parts of the show. Yeah, I mean, you've been covering sort of white nationalism, or I'm sorry, Christian nationalism. Don't mean to confuse the two.
Well, they have a lot in common. In that Venn diagram.
Pretty overlapping. I mean, you've been covering these questions and these issues and looking at a lot of these same names for a long time. Broadly speaking, do you feel like this is I don't know if healthy is the right word, but is this a healthy pendulum swing after 8 years of having a Black Democratic president, or is there something more going on here?
Yeah, this is definitely not just a healthy pendulum swing, which I'm not even sure that's a thing. But yeah, I mean, American politics, of course, does tend to have this kind of pendulum to it in terms of we tend to have divided government, right? And we tend to elect Democrats after Republicans and not have one party have the presidency, both houses of Congress for very long, if at all. There's kind of a swing back and forth. But no, this is a broader, deeper right-wing backlash. Much of it happening because our states and in some cases the federal government are actually structured to advantage conservative white people, to give them disproportionate power in our political system. So, with state politics as well as the U.S. House, gerrymandering has been an issue. Voter suppression is a huge issue, and it's going to be a huge issue in the midterms. And then, of course, there's the Electoral College, right, which basically means that a state like Wisconsin, which I think, not Wisconsin, sorry, I meant to say Wyoming. Wisconsin has a fairly big population. Wyoming has like 600,000 people, but it gets the same weight in the Senate as like California or New York.
Sure.
I really don't think that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, we all take it for granted in the sense that we learn about it in 4th and 5th grade, and we ask our silly questions, and we get our silly answers, and then we just sort of go along with, yeah, okay, so that's how we do it. That's the American system of government. But it's
right.
incredibly problematic when you don't normalize it.
Right, and if you think too about the Electoral College and the way that works, I mean, in many recent elections, and it's happening more and more, Republican candidates win the presidency while losing the popular vote. That's not normal. It's certainly not democratic.
Yeah.
So they're holding on to power, and they have this power to a degree that's really not fair. And I mean, they've done the same thing with the Supreme Court, right? They've stacked it in a brazenly hypocritical way. So when President Obama appointed or nominated, Merrick Garland, current Attorney General, for Antonin Scalia's Supreme Court seat after he unexpectedly died. Mitch McConnell said, well, we have this whole tradition I just made up of never, having hearings on a new Supreme Court justice in an election year. And then what happened with Amy Coney Barrett when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, right? They rushed Trump's nominee through. So
the small number of very conservative Christians friends that I still had in my black book, or that would still take my calls, I was honestly shocked at how easy it was to speak out of both sides of their mouth on that particular issue. That to me felt like a very clear cut, like, okay, we can all look at the news and we can all agree that there is something fishy about. And not even there. So I don't want to overly other the opposite side of the aisle, and I don't want to talk about brainwashing or any of these silly kinds of notions. I mean, the people who vote these folks in are people, and I get that, but I don't know, it's becoming increasingly challenging in these divisive times to find that common ground, or to find even a shared sense of reality. I mean, is that just me and my paranoia as I get deeper into activism, or is there something that's shifting?
No, that's not just you. Post-truth politics is a hallmark of authoritarianism. And so when you get to the point where you're disagreeing with people...
politics, that's not a term I had heard before. God, I'm going to have to sit with that for a second. Please keep talking.
Yeah, so when you get to the point where you're disagreeing with people on demonstrable facts, you're dealing with post-truth politics, right? You think back all the way to Karl Rove, George W. Bush's strategist, and his discussions of truthiness and the rise of Fox News and so forth, and the right-wing alternative media ecosystem. Yeah, it's not brainwashing, right? Brainwashing per se isn't a term that means very much. It's not really a scholarly or a scientific term. I mean, it was something that was created, I believe, in the context of, the Cold War, the CIA looking at torture techniques used by the Viet Cong and groups like that and calling them brainwashing. Now, undoubtedly, if you severely traumatize people, you have a major impact on their psychology. But, just sending people messages that are false isn't exactly brainwashing, but it does erode people's commitment to a sort of shared truth and reality. And we all do have cognitive biases, right? So all of us have certain beliefs that are associated with our identity, and it's very hard to change those, even when presented with facts. And so what right-wing social media or OAN or Fox does is takes those things and creates moral panics around them and helps to drive this defensiveness, and then pushes people ever further into this land of just believing things that aren't true. And so that tends to work well for authoritarian leaders, because if truth itself is a matter of who has political power, then it can simply be reduced to power and defined by power. And the population trying to sort through all the different narratives about things can get sort of worn out and worn down, and that works well. I mean, we've known for a long time that conservatives don't want most Americans to vote. They don't think most people should vote. Paul Weyrich, who founded the Heritage Foundation in the 1970s and was a long-time right-wing Catholic strategist and powerful, conservative actor in elite circles, very explicitly, there's footage of him saying very explicitly, I don't want most people to vote. So if they can discourage you from voting by spreading disinformation, they will. Or, look at the example of authoritarian Christian communities. I went to Christian schools growing up and was given a lot of, frankly, alternative facts, right? And I'm not just talking about young earth creationism, though. That's like the obvious go-to example, right? They were teaching me stuff that is demonstrably false and saying that it was true, and that not only was it true, but that if I didn't believe it, I probably wasn't saved and wasn't going to go to heaven, right? So there's a lot of manipulation around disinformation.
And being like armed for it. I mean, I remember spending so much time in my Christian high school preparing for the day where I would be called upon by a liberal professor at a liberal university, and I would stand up and I would say, "No, sir, that's not true." And that moment never fucking happened, because I got to college and they started teaching me things that I read in books that actually turned out to make pretty good goddamn sense, and all of a sudden the whole worldview crumbled because of it.
I can think of a couple of very embarrassing moments for myself in college where, there was one professor who really did like to push back on conservative Christian stuff and try to goad kids. And I remember her talking about how, you can know that certain stories aren't true because they contain miracles. And so I tried to defend the possible historicity of miracles, which, is embarrassing to think back on. But I also got that apologetics training, right? Defense of the faith. And you're going to, if you do go to a state school, which you probably shouldn't in the view of, the people at my school, they tried to funnel people into evangelical colleges. Then you have to be ready to stand up to these evil, godless Marxist professors. It's nonsense. But so, I mean, we were talking earlier about information control, and you can't stop kids from watching TikTok, but maybe
Trump tried, and it kind of bit him in the ass, which is fun in and of itself. But keep going.
But maybe you can get them invested in certain kinds of narratives, and maybe if they don't learn CRT at school, then they won't become anti-racists. I think it's a losing cause. Obviously, Gen Z is very secular, very liberal, and the Christian right, they know they're losing control, and that's part of why they're freaking out and trying so hard to suppress, sometimes violently, everybody that they don't like and who simply falls afoul of being allowed to exist in the way that they see the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a lot, and we're gonna keep diving into it. But I think we could use a little bit of a palate cleanser. So let's take a quick moment and see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA.
This is so much more fun than the atheist experience. No one has yelled at me yet.
Right?
Do that. This is so pleasant.
Yeah, we've been talking about brains and porn, which are really like two of my favorite things. So we're in great shape.
So I believe that good arguments are like IKEA or Legos, that you can give me the pieces and the instructions and I can put them together for myself. Let's start by defining it. You tell me what critical race theory is and tell me how that is inherently causing people to become racist, please.
That no single church can afford that $100 million.
I just see it like a kind of thing like buy a Jesus, get your salvation for free.
Like,
that's kind of...
Nice to speak to you, Kenneth. And I'm sorry, I forgot the other fellow's name.
Depending on what show, some people call me Giant Mike. I've gotten, and J Mike, and all sorts of things. So
they call him on his OnlyFans. Giant Mike. Yeah.
Giant, yeah.
Sure. They're officially recognized as haunted venues. They're called haunted.
Yes, they're officially recognized by batshit crazy people who are fans of haunted houses, just like gods are officially recognized by their devotees. I don't care whether something's officially recognized. I care whether or not there's actual evidence for it.
All right. Well, let's take a moment and jump on the phones and start out by talking to our buddy Nate in Canada. Nate, what's on your mind tonight?
Hey, Chrissy. Hey, Christy. I just wanted your take on a perception that I kind of have from the outside looking in, because I'm not American. I'm Canadian, but a lot of our media is obviously strongly influenced by our neighbors to the south. So a lot of us tend to keep our thumb on that, even if it is just kind of like when you slow down to watch a car accident.
Look, fair. It's fair. It's what that's fair.
I'm sorry, but it's true. We love you, but it seemed to me like before 2016 that our American brothers and sisters were kind of on the good foot. Like it was still kind of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but it seemed like progress was being made and things were getting better. And then with the election of a certain orange blowhard, I want to know, like, to what extent do you think his brand of populist, homophobic, xenophobic garbage emboldened these other legislators and sort of brought it to the forefront and made it okay again to be a bigot? Do you think that he was just a tool, or do you think that he actually has, like, it seems like you're kind of spiraling down at this point, even after his administration has ended, And I'm curious if you think that he was more symptom or more cause.
Personally, I think there's sort of a feedback loop going on there. I mean, in the broad sense, he was absolutely a symptom and the culmination of the politics that the Christian right has been pursuing for decades. So for people who say, oh, Trump was just using those rubes, he was just using the Christian right for power, they have it exactly backwards. The Christian right was honestly using Trump more than he was using them. But I do think that his sort of just open, brash, rude bigotry did also have an effect on giving people permission to be more bigoted. But when we talk about these state laws, I think we also need to look back to what the Supreme Court did in 2015, which is to legalize same-sex marriage in the Obergefell case. So that galvanized a lot of opposition, galvanized a lot of evangelical colleges, for example, to apply for Title IX exemptions so that they could continue to get federal funding without following the sex discrimination rules that apply to secular institutions. And they were granted those exemptions even under the Obama administration. But I think right then, and a little bit before. I mean, you think back all the way back to Prop 8 in 2008 in California, right? So same-sex marriage and rights for LGBTQ people, especially gay and lesbian people and same-sex couples, we're making a lot of progress. And there's been backlash against that since that time. That has really ramped up since 2015. And I think Obergefell and just reaction against it had more to do with that than Trump himself, to be honest.
That's an interesting perspective. For someone like me in Canada, where we've had marriage equality since I think 2003, that was like a moment where I was like, yes, you're not broken after all. I believe in you guys. Howdy, neighbor. And I guess you're right, though. That's kind of it would have that galvanizing effect on those on the other side of the fence that are like, oh shit, we are losing this battle.
Which, don't get me wrong, I'm really glad that Obergefell was decided the way it was, and I cheered for it. Just because the other side is reacting with this kind of extreme, dangerous moral panic doesn't mean I think that we should have not decided it the way that it was decided, you know? If that makes sense. I think it's very unfortunate that we have such powerful reactionaries, but again, they're not a majority of the population. They just manage to have disproportionate power, unfortunately, and be disproportionately loud.
Yeah, Nate, I don't know that we will ever be able to really quantify the chicken and the egg of Trumpism, where that came from. I do think that the man himself is a singularity that is hard to see past. Right? There was a ESPN documentary about him that came out maybe 10 years ago, well before he was like a meaningful player on the political scene, that surprisingly showed him doing almost the exact same thing he did to America to a very small sports league. And it's fascinating to think about who he is as a person and how his cult of personality may have infected American politics. But I have to, in my own very limited perspective, kind of agree with Chrissy that on a person by person by person level, I can't help but feel like he's just the avatar, that his name and the not just the policies that he was pushing, but the like particular tone of discourse that he brought into the world was really just a opportunity for folks who had kind of been looking for the chance to say some of those words out in public anyway. I don't know how much he changed things so much as he was just sort of the inevitable result of those voices wanting to be heard and wanting to grab power.
And you know,
that's a good point.
Here's the thing: he may run again in 2020. He may get the nomination. He may 2020. Sorry, in 2024, he may get the nomination. He may even win. But even if he doesn't, what he embodied, I think, continues, right? And our Republican Party, which is pretty much an authoritarian party, will find another leader to rally around if they need to. Mm-hmm. Because this is what they want right now, and they're continuing down this dark path, if you will.
Yeah, that's a scary thought that hadn't occurred to me, that even if Trump is not nominated, that the person who is nominated is likely to be in that same mold, at least in terms of rhetoric.
That's where they live right now. I don't think that's going to change because of the way that, you know, the primaries and are structured, and the way that they've structured things since 2010 with all of the gerrymandering. I mean, the incentive is always just to go further and further to the right now to get the base on your side.
Mm-hmm.
I really hope that Trump isn't even allowed to run again in 2024. I think there was like a federal circuit judge released like a 42-page briefing on the January 6th insurrection saying that Trump likely did commit a crime. So does that not disqualify him? I don't want to take us too far afield, but does that not disqualify him from running for office?
I'm not a legal expert.
Yeah. Two impeachments didn't do it. So
I mean, I do feel that America has a very, very, very poor record of holding presidents and even generally just people in their administrations, their advisors, accountable in any serious way, or any high-level elite political figure. War crimes, torture, nobody from the Bush administration got in trouble for that. We just don't hold them accountable, and I'm afraid even Trump, as exceptional as he is in this regard, is probably not likely to be held accountable. Though I still really hope I'm wrong about that.
No,
I do too.
So thanks for checking in. Thanks for looking down south with a little bit of worry. Send flowers.
You can always come to me for doom and gloom.
I'll send flowers and beer. How about that?
Hey, we'll look forward to it. Thanks for being concerned.
Well, let's all look forward to the timeline where Trump is indicted, charged, locked away, and this leads to a pendulum swing back on the good foot and towards some actual good government and good legislation for y'all.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, and then this sex show can get back to hopping on the good foot and doing the bad thing. Like, we would like to not be talking about politics on, it's really getting in the way of our fucking conversations. So
it'd be fun to talk about sex instead of right-wing conservatives' attempts to police sex and gender.
Exactly. So thanks for checking in with us. Hope to catch up with you soon, friend.
All right, you guys take care. Enjoying the show. Thanks for your input.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah. So all of this brings up very scary thoughts that I guess I'm still processing out loud. But as you were talking about Obergefell, it really occurred to me just how much of the conversation has been centered around trans rights rather than gay rights. And I know that we are talking about a lot of things. We're talking about reproductive rights in SB 8 here in Texas. We're talking about Don't Say Gay in Florida. But so much of the discourse seems to have moved from gay rights to trans rights. And we were kind of joking before the show and talking a little bit at the top about the Trans Day of Visibility and how, in a lot of ways, I think a lot of trans folks would say that life was easier 10, 20 years ago when there was less visibility, when they were less in the crosshairs. Can you tell us anything meaningful about the shift of focus from gay folks to trans folks, or why that narrative is getting ginned up in the way that it is?
Well, with regard to Trans Visibility Day, I mean, I have seen a few people say, I would love to not be so visible at this point. And I do get where that's coming from.
I'm still pro representation. I'm still pro these ideas, but I feel that in my bones.
Because now we have targets on our back. But yeah, well, trans rights are not as well established as gay rights at this point, which is not to say that they're perfectly well established everywhere in the United States with our weird patchwork of federalism and sometimes just outright not actually enforcing the laws and constitutional protections in various places. But yeah, trans rights is, I think, seen as an area where they can still contest, and for those who need it, can have a degree of plausible deniability over being bigots. Moral panics often operate around this notion of saving the kids, right? And here's another connection between anti-abortion legislation and anti-trans legislation that targets youth. You're having, these authoritarians who want to police people's gender and sexuality and make these arguments that, we're protecting kids, we're saving babies, whatever. That sort of thing works for them, though it very much tends to be projection. I mean, how did we get this whole discourse about child abuse and about, age-appropriate gender-affirming care, which, let's be clear here, for kids before adolescence, that generally means just access to counseling and social transition if they want to, just the ability to do what they want with their hair and their clothes and have their parents support and change their pronouns or their name if they want to, so that there's plenty of time to establish, whether you do have a case of just gender nonconformity and someone decides that they're cisgender after all and they can be cis and different and that's great, or if you really have a case of gender dysphoria a diagnosis that, in fact, medical practitioners are somewhat reluctant to give out. It is not super easy to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So there's no one like rushing to give this diagnosis out to kids, right? But so there's plenty of time to distinguish between those two things, and they are different things. And then if you have a kid who clearly has gender dysphoria and it's persistent over a number of years, and that kid is entering adolescence, then maybe puberty blockers enter the picture. They are safe. They are prescribed for a number of conditions. They are not experimental. And they're not irreversible, right? So we're not making irreversible changes. And after that, typically not until the kid is no longer a minor, then we talk about hormones and possibly surgeries and things that could make permanent changes. Although even hormonal changes are to a large extent reversible, especially when you're not too far along with them. So all of the concerns about this are, disingenuous or simply not based in facts. I mean, I suppose they can be sincere, but not based in facts. But what you have is this rhetoric of people wanting to save children, right? And so how did this happen in Texas? I mean, there's this guy, Jeffrey Younger, who's now running for the Texas State House, right? Who was involved in a custody battle with his ex-wife, who is a pediatrician, and was allowing their child to socially transition in line with medical best practices as established by wide consensus, when the child was staying with her. And so he he basically abused the system and accused her of child abuse for that, right? It was an abusive thing for him to do. And flipping things on their head like that is often how abusers operate, and it's how authoritarian states and authoritarian communities operate as well. So they take something that, is actually something that certain kids really need, right, to feel happy and whole and themselves, and say that allowing the kids to do that is abusive and they are saving the children. But as long as you're saving the children, you'll get a hearing. And there are some on the left who are willing to join them in this as well. We talk sometimes about TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, and they have a very strong foothold in Britain and are taken seriously in the British media, even the BBC, in a way that the trans community itself is not. And so there have been some who have been working to separate the LGB from the T, and basically being willing to throw trans people to the wolves. It is another reason that trans people make for a more vulnerable target at this point. I don't think there's necessarily anything that's really that much harder to understand what it means to be transgender than to understand what it means to be gay or bisexual. But some people seem to have a real issue with that. And I mean, I think in most cases, it's more personal hangups probably than really a lack of ability to understand it. But yeah. It's easy still to push that trope that, not enough is known, it's experimental. Mm-hmm. We can't allow kids to make permanent changes that they might regret later. They'll always trot out a few detransitioners and say, look, these are living cautionary tales. We don't want kids to end up like this. The vast majority of people who actually do move on to hormonal transition never regret it, feel better, and don't want to go back. But, doctors aren't pushing this on people. When I first went and asked for hormones, I wasn't able to get them right away. And the doctor made sure that this was a real and persistent thing that I was having, and also made sure to tell me, you need to know that. And so first we're going to try just a very low dose, not even a therapeutic dose. And if you don't, if you want to stop at any time, you can stop. Doctors aren't just out there pushing this on people, but you've got people on both the right and the far crazy left, but mostly on the right, claiming that there are these evil doctors out there and psychologists and therapists and school teachers who just want to make all the kids trans. In fact, I saw the weirdest conspiracy theory on Twitter today. God. It was getting some traction. This guy claimed that the reason that the left is pushing kids to be trans, which we're not, by the way. Nobody does that. That's not a thing.
That's not a thing.
But is pushing kids to be queer. It's part of a 2-step process, he says, in making kids into revolutionaries, right? So first, you teach them CRT, so the white kids feel bad about themselves because now they've learned that they are oppressors and no, there's nothing they can do about that. They're just bad because they're white. But then you teach them about sexuality and gender, and then they learn, oh, if I just say I'm non-binary, now I can be oppressed again and have all the wonderful status that comes to you when you get to claim an oppressed status. So I mean, that's just bonkers.
Yeah. First of all, the numbers just don't add up in any meaningful way. Like the number of trans folks that exist are important because they're human beings, but in terms of voting blocks, not a thing. And I'm a gender and sexuality therapist. As much as anybody is, I am working with and working to support these folks. And I cannot get doctors to take my phone calls. I meet with somebody for an hour every single week for month after month, and a doctor meets with them for 15 minutes and doesn't want to hear anything that I have to say, when what I'm trying to say is that this is somebody who may be getting some value out of hormone replacement therapies. These things are incredibly challenging to get. There is a lot of red tape and a lot of reticence on the part of prescribers because of all of the political pressure. The idea that doctors are going out of their way to shove these things down people's throats is just absolutely asinine. I have seen zero examples of that.
And it's really, I think, the same sort of phenomenon as you probably got this sort of thing in Christian school too, where sometimes when Christians are talking about evolutionists or secular scientists, they're like, the only reason they don't believe in God, which also, by the way, lots of people do believe in God and evolution. Like you can also do that.
Sure.
Like Francis Collins is actually an evangelical Human Genome Project dude. But anyway, the reason they don't believe in God and they're trying to teach us about evolution is because they just want to sin all the time. Right. So they just want to be queer or just have all the sex or just do all the drugs. And so they make everything into a conspiracy theory like this. Right. There's only one reason people wouldn't be exactly like us, and it's because they're evil.
Yeah, it really is exhausting. But at the same time, this quote unquote culture war is not about winning and losing. I mean, people are hurting and dying because of these practices, because of these policies. And so I guess I'm hearing from you a fair amount of doom and gloom. And it makes me kind of curious what your worst case scenario might entail.
Worst case scenario, I mean, is large scale violence, genocide. It's not impossible because we've gone pretty far down the road of dehumanization already, right? And one form of genocide is taking children of the targeted group away from their parents. And people have talked about how the sports bans that are passing widely. The parents that I talked to in Texas, they also talked about the trans school sports ban that was passed last year as kind of a gateway law, planting certain ideas in people's minds that, oh, these trans girls, they're just boys who want to dominate girls on the playing field, which is not how sports works or gender or anything.
Or any of those things. That's not what any of those words mean. And yet.
or with the bathroom bills, right? Just these are men in dresses who want to be predators. Queer people continue, this is a long-standing trope, continue to be represented as predators and pedophiles, right? It's again, it's that externalization because sexual abuse tends to usually happen close to home, right? With trusted authority figures, family members, close family friends, clergy,
particularly in authoritarian environments.
Right. Abuse thrives there because it will be covered up. As long as it's done by someone who has a high enough place in the social hierarchy, it will be covered up. So abuse thrives in those kinds of circumstances. They know there's a monster in themselves and in their communities that they don't want to look at. And so instead they just look and see a monster somewhere else, and they choose to see it in queer people. So scapegoating is a major mechanism that is in play there. But yeah, these dynamics can really ramp up and escalate. This new policy that, again, it isn't even a law, it didn't even pass the legislature, it's just a radical executive reinterpretation of Texas child abuse law in Texas, represents a major escalation. If it is allowed to stand, I can certainly see the conversation on adoption, for example, moving from, well, we just need to protect the right of, religious adoption organizations to only adopt straight Christian couples, to, well, maybe queer, maybe people in same-sex marriages shouldn't be allowed to adopt kids at all, to maybe we should take their kids away because clearly they're not being raised right, and we've done it before. Right? This is why we have something called the Indian Child Welfare Act that was passed in the 1970s, because lots and lots of Native children were being taken illegitimately from their families, ripped away, sent to residential schools where they suffered violence and abusive treatment in Canada,
Quote,
and
civilization,
and the United States, so they could be, quote, civilized. Yes,
Yeah.
right. So you could, quote, kill the Indian and save the man. This isn't actually something that is just fiction, right? This has happened, and it can happen again, targeting a different demographic. So, I mean, I think things can get very, very bad. I hope they don't, but I think they can, and we need to think about that.
Yeah, no, it's fair to say. Maybe I am just 30 enough to be nervous now. But for so much of my life, I've been the type of humanist that really believes that the overarching theme, even if there are some backward steps, that we are ultimately heading towards, if not true utopia, then something slightly better than what we found. And the longer I spend in front of this microphone, the more time I spend around these issues, the more I'm shaking in my boots, and the more I'm feeling a little bit anxious and overwhelmed. I definitely don't mean to make any of this conversation about you or I or the mantles that we carry, but we were kind of talking before the show. This has just been a tough time to be a person, and to show up for a show like this has been a little bit extra exhausting, when the research that you're going through just makes it that much harder to drink a beer and watch TV, which is, I think, what we are all kind of wanting to do right now with the way our economy and everything else is. But before I start to descend into existential angst, let's jump on the calls one more time and talk to our friend Stephanie, who I think has a number of questions about this issue. Stephanie, what's on your mind tonight? All right. Well, let's return to the conversation. We'll get that straightened out. What do you see as our opportunities here? What are the levers and the pulleys that we actually have access to? Because the voting box seems to be a small part of it, if at all. I mean, where do you find hope?
Well, state and local battles matter quite a bit at this point, because this is sort of happening in a patchwork. And, and let's say that politically the worst case, the electoral worst case scenario plays out. Republicans retake the legislature in the midterms and then retake the presidency in 2024. I still think that for a good while, states will be able to set policies different from the federal government on some of these issues. We'll be able to be more protective of human rights, more genuinely democratic and inclusive. So state battles are something that people can participate in.
Local politics matter.
Local politics absolutely matters, and people can get involved with school board, with local non-discrimination ordinances, hearings, meetings. You can possibly do something, find something to get involved in. Other than that, I think getting people's stories out there and representation still matter. And so that's why Trans Day of Visibility, I think, is still ultimately a good thing. And people who want to be allies and aren't trans or queer themselves can try to help get the voices of trans people out there so that people do understand more. And I suppose everyone can make a commitment just to get a little more educated about this, right? So that you can help trans people from, not having to explain everything to everyone again and again and again every time, right? You can help to educate the wider public as well if you get educated yourself on trans issues. But yeah, I think narratives, stories matter. They help change people's minds, hearts and minds. And so conversation by conversation, that's still important.
Yeah. Which, not to be even more doom and gloom about it, but to circle back to what you were saying about the bills around sport, that is for me why those ideas are so insidious, because now I have gone from somebody who is able to advocate for a queer teen and speak to their parents and say, hey, I don't know exactly who your child is or who they will become. They don't know who they are entirely or who they will become, but everything that we're doing is within the range of good practice. And here is some literature. Here are some statistics. And now that conversation is being couched by whatever the hell Ron DeSantis or Ted Cruz or Marjorie Taylor Greene has to say on the subject. And so that visibility or that notion that there's something less than right about all of this is incredibly frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are there any particular organizations that you might be able to point us towards? Anything that might help us to get a little bit of traction here?
Well, for helping trans youth and trans folks in legal battles, Lambda Legal is a great national organization to support, and helping fight against trans youth suicide, the Trevor Project. But I would also encourage people to look to whatever local organizations are fighting those battles in your state, and probably know more what's needed on the ground in your state. The parents that I was talking to for my recent reporting in Texas talked about this organization called TENT, which of course off the top of my head now, there it is, Transgender Education Network of Texas. I had to look it up again, but they said that's a state organization that's doing great things. Putting out guides, for example, about what to do if CPS does come knocking on your door because you have a trans kid or are suspected of having a trans kid, that you might be allowing to get, appropriate medical care. So yeah, look for local organizations too, just wherever you happen to be. And I've heard some rousing endorsements of TENT from Texan parents of trans kids that I spoke with recently.
I saw that in some of your reporting, you talked to the Briggle family, and they've become sort of local advocates for a number of organizations and have definitely been on my radar. And so I might even point people towards Amber Briggle on Instagram and on Facebook and some of these things. And there will certainly be links to Tent and to everything that we've been talking about in the show notes for this episode. But let's go back to the phones and see if we can check in with our friend Stephanie. Stephanie, what's on your mind tonight?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Chrissy that you're the emptying the pews work that you've done over time is invaluable.
Thank you.
And it's got nothing to do with trans issues per se, but
just very quickly, we had Chrissy on the show right after the Emptying the Pews was released, but can you tell the audience very quickly what that project is?
Sure. It's an essay anthology co-edited by myself and my friend Lauren O'Neill that simply gives a diverse group of authors who've left conservative Christianity the space to tell their own compelling personal stories. Whatever they want to say about, leaving Christianity and what played into that. There are a lot of queer narratives in the book, But yeah, my essay was about the time before I was even conscious of being trans, because that was a belated thing for me because of my fundamentalist upbringing to even be able to recognize that. So I didn't, right? I mean, it's not like my whole life is caught up in being transgender. I wrote about my missionary experience in Russia.
So there's that. But where we're at right now in the current political context is we need help. Right? We need the where we're at is there's a mobilization of the people that are still in the pews that are trying to frame gay and trans people as being somewhat of the devil. And I actually know a number of really quite devout gay and trans people who still have an affinity toward religion. And this is it's very, very hurtful to me. It's very hurtful that there are so many people who are willing to sit by and say, we have your back because you're one of the good ones. You're okay. But they won't do anything when laws are being passed that basically take away their humanity. I mean, it's pretty fucking scary. I mean, I don't mind being visible, but in a lot of respects, I wish I was invisible.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to have a trans day of invisibility when my being who I am is simply accepted as being another human being, right?
Mm-hmm. I can absolutely understand that, Stephanie.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful for me to be featured on the website of my national governing body in sport to say, oh yeah, we're so accepting of trans people. But I would much prefer that didn't need to fucking happen.
Sure.
There's a tension there.
I'd rather
there's
be
a tension there for sure.
I'd rather be known as a good person and as a good competitor and as a pretty good sailor than as a qualified trans. Well, she's okay, but she's trans after all.
I for a short time in grad school, I had
bullshit that goes along with this is ridiculous. Anyway, that's my point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had a gay roommate who was like studying aerospace engineering, and he always refused to make being gay sort of the centerpiece of his identity. He would always say, "I'm a nerd first." But he was very.
I'm a gay nerd is just a qualifier.
He was very gay, and I mean, and obviously, sometimes he would play that up because he really liked being a bad Catholic. Like, so he really reveled in being a terrible Catholic in his view. So yeah, but yeah. I think that we're often viewed as only our gender because of the way things are right now, and we should be allowed to be whole people. So we need all kinds of representation. Obviously, we have to talk about trans issues as trans issues, and obviously, a lot of trans people are not passing. Others may be passing. That is, perceived as cisgender. Just if other people look at them, they're not going to notice anything. But it'd be nice if we could all just be seen as, our whole selves, with gender just being one part of that.
Yeah, well, that's another whole conversation, is passing versus not passing, and that goes into our own internal conversation as to, is this acceptable? Where does my dysphoria start and where does it end? And where do you accept it and where do you let go of it and all of that other stuff? But those are really personal issues. The difficulty that I see in current discourse, public discourse, is other people are making those decisions for us. Not that they haven't in the past, but we're, the shit is getting loaded upon us. Back 24 years ago when I transitioned, this was not an issue in law, right? Mm-hmm. The fucking the Massachusetts state legislature wasn't making a law saying you cannot do this. You cannot be who you are. Mm-hmm. This is a difference in kind. The legislation that we fought against in the 50s and 60s was trying to overturn discriminatory laws forbidding people to be, to interact in the public sphere. Like, if you're white, you're going here. If you're black, you're going there. And this water fountain, that water fountain. This bathroom, that bathroom.
And don't forget that cross-dressing was also illegal.
Of course it was, but the point is, discriminatory laws were overturned over the course of time. What we're facing now is discriminatory laws that are being passed. I mean, people are affirmatively passing legislation that is discriminatory. And we're not overturning things that it's like, well, that's ridiculous. Why should we have laws about where black people and white people can go to the bathroom or drink out of a soda fountain?
All of these laws that were eventually superseded by the Civil Rights Act were at one point passed. And so I think it raises an interesting question about what the future might look like in terms of a constitutional amendment or some landmark legislation that would ensure equal rights for people regardless of their gender identity or their sexual identity and these kinds of things. We're certainly a long ways away from that. And so I don't know what that future is going to look like. But it definitely is a scary picture that Chrissy has been painting tonight. So I appreciate you being concerned about these things.
On the other hand, I appreciated President Biden calling for the passage of the Equality Act today, but it's not passing anytime soon.
Yeah, fair to say.
What we're seeing is state after state after state asserting their authority to essentially pass laws like anti-miscegenation laws. So keep your eyes open because that's what's going on. And
no question, there is still so much going wrong. There is still so much to keep a lookout on. So we've got one more call I want to make sure to hit before we wrap up tonight, Stephanie. We're getting terribly close to the deadline, but I do appreciate you continuing to raise the alarm and to highlight just how scary some of these changes can be.
Thanks for calling in, Stephanie, and thanks for your support.
All right, take care. And we are going to quickly speak to Dylan in Florida. Dylan, what's on your mind tonight?
Hello. I sort of just wanted to call in, and as a Florida resident myself, I kind of actually have a lot of hope for my generation, at least, because I'm 23, and it wasn't too long ago that I was in school, and just my experience in Central Lakeland. Even a lot of the adults in my life are if not queer positive, generally just neutral about a lot of issues, and they understand, oh, this is like a thing. This is kind of fucked up. Sorry, but
no, it's incredibly fucked up. I got no problem saying it. I got no problem hearing it. These laws are fucking bullshit. But keep going, Dylan.
I always forget when you have to, which programs I'm on require the FCC rules and which ones don't. But yeah, fucked up indeed.
Because I've kind of joked that how my high school experience is actually a lot more to how a lot of people say their college experiences, because I had maybe 2 straight friends, and most of my friends were either trans or just gender nonconforming, and I just really, really enjoyed just being around a lot of just people my age that were queer and out, and even like 2 of my friends that were trans masc were already on testosterone whenever I had met them. And that wasn't very long ago. And I really do feel that even though Florida is I feel like it's really the death throes of just, we gotta try and do it. You gotta try and, try and put them down. And then just my generation at the voting age, we're just like, nah, fuck you, man. No, fuck off. No,
Thanks for that hope, Dylan. I've been to Lakeland, and I lived in Tampa from 2015 to 2018. I taught at USF.
Yeah, it is, because we just started in Lakeland having like a pride. We didn't have it this year because COVID, but past 2 years because of COVID. But we like just started having it, and at first it was a lot of just like people coming in to like sell like car insurance, to be honest, but. It's kind of come in a lot more.
It can be.
Yeah, and I think you got to kind of reconcile yourself with some of that, pink capitalism, because it's at least it's
capitalism. Yeah,
it's encouraging acceptance, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and Dylan, I hear what you're saying, and I don't want to be the 34-year-old looking down on the 24-year-old. I definitely know that when I was 24, I was having a lot of those same thoughts. I was looking around and all right, we're getting it right. We're starting to figure it out. And I still want to believe that. Like I said, I still want to be that kind of humanist. I still want to believe in hope for the future. And I think that there is a lot of great things to point towards. Certainly, if visibility for trans folks is a double-edged sword, I still think it's a good thing, and we can say that visibility has increased significantly.
The kids do give me hope, I gotta say.
Yeah, the kids are getting it right. We can point towards better representation in film. We can point towards landmark legislation like Obergefell. There are things to get excited about. That doesn't mean I'm not incredibly nervous. And I think that's all it really comes down to for me. Whether things are going well or going poorly, my nervous system is acting up when we have these conversations. So Dylan, a little bit of hopefulness is beautiful. Thank you for sharing yours.
Absolutely. Yeah, things can escalate, right? But ultimately, young people don't want this politics of hate. They don't. The vast majority of them don't. So it's going to die eventually. It has to.
I just wanted to call just because I feel like at least my generation we're really trying not to accept it. And honestly, a lot of the kids that are still in school just protesting and just being more active than even I was in school. I honestly I like to see it.
No, well, thank you for saying gay in Florida and for giving us a little parcel of hope tonight, because you're right. There are kids that are protesting and walking out of schools. There are a lot of things to get excited about. And we'll see how it all plays out. At the end of the day, these national trends, these headlines, these statistics are really just representations of people. So think global, act local, find your people, and do what you can to be a force for good in the world. Thank you so much for giving us a call tonight.
Thank you.
Well, Chrissy, there's obviously a lot to be anxious about. We've gone back and forth in a lot of ways, but something that Stephanie brought up as she was talking about the religious connections here and talking about how there is a decrease in religiosity in the world, whatever that ends up actually meaning or whatever that ends up turning into. I guess I wanted to take at least one moment before we start to wrap up tonight to hear if there was anything that you wanted to say to the folks who have already emptied the pews. It's worth noting that there are plenty of people in our atheist community that have tuned out this episode, that don't watch this show because we're prone to have this conversation, and that don't believe that trans rights are important, that these rights exist or should exist, or that the atheism banner should cover these conversations. So is there anything that you might say to those folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very wrong-headed for a number of reasons, but I guess primarily I'll borrow an argument from my friends at American Atheists, where they've been producing a lot of reports, gathering a lot of data, studying first of all, what younger atheists want, and overwhelmingly younger secular Americans do see advocating for LGBTQ folks as a part of secular advocacy. But the argument that they consistently make in webinars and elsewhere, some of which I've been a part of, full disclosure, is that LGBTQ rights issues, they are a church-state separation issue. So if you think that that's really all the atheist movement should be about, I think that's somewhat myopic. But ultimately, attacks on LGBTQ equality, they're mostly motivated by religious beliefs. Certainly hashtag not all, but they're coming from the Christian right, and they the more that they try to carve out these religious freedom exceptions and these rights to discriminate, I mean, the further they can go to discriminate against other groups. So I don't think that any group that falls outside of the mainstream in America needs to be alienating unnecessarily other such groups, right? We need to build broad coalitions. And if they can go after queer people for explicitly religious reasons, I mean, they can come after atheists who aren't queer. They can come after other people.
Yeah. Well, I'll get your final thoughts here in a moment, but for now, let's go ahead and leave it there. Where can people find more about you, about your work, your journalism, and help to keep their finger on the pulse of what the hell is going on in the world?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So you can find me on Twitter at @C_Stroop. I'm pretty active there. And I am a self-employed writer currently with 2 regular gigs as well as a bunch of irregular gigs, but I am a senior correspondent for Religion Dispatches. So if you go to religiondispatches.org, you can find a lot of my commentary on religion, politics, and society. And I am a columnist for Open Democracy, which is a UK-based outlet. So you can check them out as well. And if you haven't picked up a copy of Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church, you can get that anywhere you buy books. If you like your local brick and mortar bookstore, they can order it for you. Or you can do the evil thing and just get it from Amazon.
Well, some of my favorite reporting of yours and links to so many of the things that we've been talking about will be in the show notes to this episode. But I want to take a quick moment to remind folks that they can find this show as well as all of the ACA's other work at tiny.cc/AEN podcast for an audio-only version of these conversations. I definitely want to encourage people to not just listen to our opinion on these topics, but to actually dive into the articles, to look at some of the reporting, to consider some of the research, and to invest in the conversation. And one of the best places to do that is the Secular Sexuality Facebook fan group. You can find links to that at tiny.cc/FBSSG. as well as to continue this conversation. If you're catching this show live, you'll be able to find Chrissy and I in the atheist community of Discord. That's tiny.cc/ACD Discord. And then I'll mention that we are putting together some pretty exciting merch opportunities. Watch this space. Check out tiny.cc/merchaca. We've got some really fun things coming down the pipe. And before we get out of here tonight, I want to make sure to thank all of the folks that help us put this show on, the people behind the camera that actually make everything go, and show you our crew cam of our incredible cast. Thank you so much for everything you do to help us put all of this together. And finally, Chrissy, before we leave for tonight, what kind of final thoughts or impressions would you like to leave with the audience?
Well, I guess I'll just say that even though I immerse myself in doom and gloom a lot and I study these kinds of worst case scenarios, it doesn't stop me from enjoying life most of the time or from fighting back, right? So keep the non-faith, I guess. And, the kids are all right. That's why the Republicans are going after them. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's some hope out there.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to hold on to that one. The kids are all right. If nothing else, the Melissa Leo, Mark Ruffalo film, Julianne Moore, by that title, The Kids Are All Right, was a huge influence on me, letting go of some of my bullshit and wrong-headed beliefs. And I have to believe that shows like this, that the representation of Trans Visibility Day, that the changes we're seeing in Hollywood, that a lot of these things are moving the needle in some exciting ways. So whether you find comfort in that or not, this feels like a great time to turn off the news, to take a quiet moment for yourself, to maybe relax with your favorite cartoon, to say gay, and to give yourself a big ol' orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.